Chanda? Oh, there he is. Okay. Okay, last but definitely not least, Gary Ecelbarger, who's known to a lot of you for his Civil War work, his numerous tours here in the Valley in particular. I've done a number of bus tours with him, excellent excursions. He's an award-winning author of 10 books and more than 36 articles and essays relating to 18th and 19th century personalities and events. His presentations and discussions have frequently appeared on Book Talk, C-SPAN, and not too long ago, he left the dark side of Civil War history and joined the light of Revolutionary War history. And he has done a remarkable job. He has now published both volumes of a 2-volume history and analysis of the Continental Army headquarters during the iconic Valley Forge winter and the 2 campaigns that surrounded it, Brandywine and Monmouth, under the general title George Washington's Momentous Year, which it's not only Washington's momentous year, but Gary's momentous accomplishment in those 2 volumes. So without further ado, Gary Ecelbarger.
Is the presentation loaded up?
Yes.
Ah, it is. I think I got too clever for myself. That font is Poor Richard. Getting it? Figure that one out. This is a tough topic to cover in a truncated period of time, considering the number of battles involved with it and the impact of it occurring before, in the middle, and even afterwards. So the approach I took is something that actually improved my interest as I was putting this together. And I wanted to combine the generalship of George Washington and what we call the 10 Crucial Days, which is a period of from December 25th, 1776 to January 3rd, 1777, from the crossing of the Delaware River to the end of the Battle of Princeton in New Jersey. And look at the impact of his generalship and also how it was depicted by artists of the period and afterwards. And I decided that to make this more visual, and even for folks in the back that won't be able to read little maps, maybe you can see the images pretty well too. I sat in the back and I could appreciate that myself. So I'm starting you out here with my cover slide of a statue that's sitting in Trenton right now. It's actually an image that you've seen in one of the most famous paintings of the 19th century, and that's Emanuel Loitz's painting of Washington crossing the Delaware in 1851. This is an Italian marble statue produced from that in 1876. So if you go to a certain park in Trenton today, you have a 150-year-old statue that depicts that very scene. So that's kind of what we're talking about today. And since I'm going to be talking about the artists, I think you should take a look at some of the images of some of the personnel that took part in this campaign. And this isn't all of them, of course, and it's only on the American side, but I wanted to put this up for a reason. The person on the bottom right, as you're looking at it, is Lieutenant Charles Wilson Peel. He's a member of the Pennsylvania Associators, serving under his Colonel John Cadwallader, who you see over to his left. He is the artist that created most of the images of the early war period and was also a soldier at the same time, as was his brother, James Peel. So they're participants in the campaign, and he has captured the images of what most of these folks looked like during the campaign. Even those of you that are pretty well versed in Revolutionary War art, I think you're going to be surprised at looking at Colonel/Brigadier General. He gets promoted in the campaign. Henry Knox on the left-hand side. You picture the more famous image of that obese man in the mid-1780s. Here he's a 26-year-old, looks older because his hair is powdered, and he's heavy-set but not nearly as obese as the later image will indicate. In fact, Knox starts gaining most of his weight during the Valley Forge winter. Go figure. Alexander Hamilton portrays himself as 3 years younger than his actual age, and if you look at that 1777 image of him, you can see why. He looks very youthful, right? That's not $10 bill, Alexander Hamilton. He doesn't look at all like the Alexander Hamilton in the musical. I was going to write to folks about that. I don't know why that's the case. And on the far right, we see Nathaniel Greene. Again, that's an image that you're not familiar with, but that was painted by Charles Willson Peale in 1778. So that's what he looked like during the 10 Crucial Days, or pretty close to it. That's why I put those images there. So these are examples of that. And the reason why I bring Peale into this is that he is the only one who has captured George Washington from life sittings. In other words, Washington posed for Peale during this period, and Peale is the only one that captures Washington's image from life. Here are the bookend images of Washington that surround this period. The more well-known one to you probably is the one on the left. It was created for John Hancock, who commissioned Peale to make that painting. That was created 8 months before the Battle of Princeton, at least the sketch of it was. And the more obscure image, a miniature that you see on the right, that was created 8 months after the Battle of Princeton. So Washington in between that is the one we're looking at. Again, his hair is powdered. Washington's at his peak. He's in his mid-40s. He's a little over 6 feet 2 inches tall, fully uniformed. And he has a tendency for his weight to fluctuate. You see a more robust man there in the left-hand side. I think the one that probably captured Washington the way he looked best was somebody that knew him in 75 but doesn't sketch him till 1780 in England, so we know Washington wasn't there. And that's this image right here. John Trumbull, who will come back to the States and create many more famous Revolutionary War images. But this thinner version of Washington that you see here with his funky headdress valet has enslaved William Lee to his side there. But the Washington you see there is probably captured best as the way he looked at this time of the campaign. And I think it's only fitting for me to start this that we have Washington in this image in 1780 depicting Washington a little bit earlier standing at the banks of the Hudson River. And that's where I'm going to start. George Washington wept on the banks of the Hudson River on November 16, 1776, as a witness said, with the tenderness of a child. With his dollared spyglass in his hand, he looked across 1 mile from his Palisades Heights at Fort Lee in New Jersey over to Manhattan, where Fort Washington stood, and there he watched in horror and helplessness as the garrison there, consisting of a lot of Pennsylvanians among other soldiers, but nearly 3,000 of them, he could watch them all capitulate to a series of Hessian attacks on November 16th. And it was a dismal close to a dismal New York campaign. 2,900 men killed, wounded, captured, a lot of them cut down even after they surrendered, and Washington couldn't do anything about it, and witnesses watched him cry as he's watching that scene unfold. And what will happen next is a crucial 7 weeks. In fact, exactly 49 days from that moment is the Battle of Princeton. So what occurs from that stage on is Washington will have to conduct a retreat. He will move through New Jersey, being pressed heavily by the Crown forces, particularly redcoats, British soldiers under Cornwallis, that will sometimes in that advanced guard number about 10,000 men, lining the banks of the Raritan River across from Brunswick on December 1st, for example, which we call New Brunswick today. But Washington, for the most part, isn't too heavily pressed in that campaign, and he will make his way to the banks of the Delaware River on December 2nd. And we often hear from the literature, let me mention something about the literature. There are numerous books and periodicals devoting a lot of attention to this campaign, and that's been the case for 20 years, and it's wonderful. Some great scholarship has been produced, and we are learning a lot more that sometimes supports the tradition of the campaign and sometimes overrides it. And I'm hopefully I'm going to represent some of that literature here. I do have a couple little twists to add myself. Please don't throw anything if you hear something that you object to. And if you do throw fruit, make sure it's peeled. So at one stage, for example, Washington you'll hear the story that Washington is only down to about 3,000 men, and that comes from an aide to one of his generals, future President James Monroe, doing a head count, watching them file through Newark during the retreat. Maybe that's what he counted, but when there is a return, a troop strength return existing from Trenton on December 1st, it's hardly ever cited, but I studied it, and it showed that Washington had 5,000 men in Trenton and another 1,000 at the banks of the Raritan at the same time. So he's got about 6,000 men. It's a far cry of what he had in New York, which was over 20,000 at one stage, but a series of casualties, as you learned from Fort Washington, desertions and expirations of terms of service. For these one-year enlistments, they're leaving the Army in droves, regiments at a time when their terms are up, and Washington realizes that he's in dire straits. I think the game is pretty near up, he will write to his brother on December 18th, because if you lose the Army, you're going to lose your country, and the country has just declared its independence in the summer of 1776, and Washington's army has dwindled away. Everybody's faith in Washington's leadership has dwindled away as well. In an earlier talk, you heard about the Conway Cabal. That was generated by sometimes from the army and from politicians. The criticisms of Washington in '76 were coming from his own headquarters and from generals in his army. He's a weak man, said Alexander Stephen. He's indecisive, said his adjutant general Joseph Reed, echoed by, of course, Charles Lee, who always would have to have his digs in there, wouldn't he? He is not fit for the situation, wrote General Mifflin. So Washington's under heavy criticism, and you can see why. He certainly is not proving himself to be able to command anything more than a regiment in which he had in the earlier war. So that they're recognizing that, or at least believing that. So Washington has to restore faith in his leadership, he has to restore the strength of his army, and he has to be able to reverse the fortunes of what has been a disaster here. Not only do the British control New York City, the largest city in the United States of America, but here is the commander of the Crown Forces, William Howe, General William Howe. He now has controlled most of New Jersey as well. He decides not to extend the campaign in the middle of December. The Delaware River is not frozen. The Continental Congress has vacated Philadelphia for a safer meeting point further down the Delaware at Baltimore. And what Howe decides to do is set up a series of outposts along the banks of the Delaware, and he'll pull back to New York. Those outposts are primarily going to be manned by these kind of soldiers, Hessians. All right, plenty of new material out about the Hessians. In the summer of '76, anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 of them arrived in America. They are not mercenaries. They weren't soldiers for hire individually. They are armies that are sent, or regiments that are sent through their respective principalities in what is now Germany, but it certainly wasn't a country back then in the 1700s. But that's where these soldiers came from, and they are helping out as part of the Crown Forces, along with British troops, which includes England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and it also includes, of course, American loyalists. Those all constitute the Crown Forces, much stronger numerically than Washington's army and much more experienced than Washington's army at this stage. That outpost that this Hessian Grenadier represents is at Trenton. And what Washington has decided to do, even as early as the 14th or 15th, when he's admitting the game is nearly up, is he's looking at a chance to, as he says, strike a blow at the enemy. He needs to have a good turnaround action. And I'm going to do something a little different in what you hear about with the 10 crucial days with the 3 battles that are about to follow. I'm actually, in my thinking, going to split it up into 2 campaigns that actually are butting up against each other together. So this one that I'm going to talk about now is either solo or at the end of this very first campaign. It's going to lead to the first Battle of Trenton. Washington has decided, as he reaches the safety of Pennsylvania between December 2nd and December 8th, he's crossed all of his men over, loses very few men in the early December, and he's on the Pennsylvania side of the river. His army is growing. By the end of the 3rd week of December and the beginning of the 4th week of December, Washington has about 10,000 soldiers on the Pennsylvania side of the river. He scouted out the Hessian outpost at Trenton, and that is 3 Hessian regiments commanded by Colonel Johann Rahl. Their actual strength is 1,382 officers and men. Washington knows it's a little over 1,000. There's another body of Hessian troops under Carlos von Dunop at near Bordentown, where you see that big bend in the Delaware River, roughly about the same size body of troops. So Washington has to try to find a way to strike a big victory, a temporary one, before the main body of the British Army could react to it, and that's to hit the vulnerable outpost at Trenton. And here's the plan he designs. Now, this map, which is in a book called 10 Crucial Days by Larry Kidder, does a wonderful job showing it. It's a little simplified in this aspect, just to show you how active business and commerce is on the Delaware River. Between Philadelphia at the bottom of that map and Coriolis Ferry at the top, that 40 miles of river, there are actually 15 operating ferries in 1776. That's F-E-R-R-I-E-S. Don't get any thought in your head about that. So 15 ferries in 1776, and we only have a few of these highlighted. What Washington wants to do is he's going to try 4 crossing points by his plan, which is fairly well mapped out over the next several days from the 22nd to the 24th or so. He's going to have a body of troops cross, a small body of troops cross at Philadelphia at Cooper's Ferry, another body of troops under John Cadwalader. You saw his image in the one of those earlier collage slides that I showed. He will cross 18 to 1,900 officers and men at one of the ferries near Bristol. Another crossing will be conducted by a commander named Ewing, of about 900 to 1,000 men, right across from Trenton at the ferry there. And then Washington himself will command a crossing at McConkey's Ferry. Now, we often put the numbers at Washington's crossing at McConkey's, or at least the plan of it, at 2,400 men. I think that's the low-scaled number when you count all the noses of soldiers, officers, artillerists, even the fife and drums that will come across. I think the number is going to come closer to 3,000. Washington has 6,000 men up there. Realize that. He has 7 brigades, 28 regiments. Each regiment by that December 22nd returns a little over 200 men. There comes your number. But it would be crazy to cross all of them for a lightning strike. I hope you can realize that. You've got to make a lot of trips over the river. They have a maximum of 16 Durham boats and 4 flatboats to make these trips, so you have to go back and forth several times to get the crossing done. So Washington will choose about half of that force to make the crossing. His plan is that Ewing's force, which is going to cross at Colvin's Ferry right across from Trenton, is going to block the British retreat at Assunpink Creek at the south part of town, while Washington will send 2 prongs of attack under his chief generals Greene and Sullivan, through Trenton from the north to the south. In the meantime, Cadwalader is supposed to tie up von Dunop from assisting at Trenton with the help of those forces already in New Jersey, across from Philadelphia, and from Putnam's Philadelphia force. It's a good plan. And if it goes according to plan, Washington well outnumbers his opponent. It's not a shot in the dark. It's a 4-to-1 advantage. 6,000 total men invested in this against the primary source is going to be those 1,300 to 1,400 Hessians at Trenton. All right, so that's the plan. And the crossing is captured in contemporary art, and especially in the 19th century during the Romantic period. But here's a wonderful painting. It's not well known, but this is Washington's crossing of the Delaware by an 1819 painting by Thomas Sully. And there you see Washington on his white horse Blueskin looking back toward the Delaware. This is the Pennsylvania side. If you look on that far left-hand side of the image, you see the Durham boats, which can carry up to 40 men. They have 18 oars. They're crewed by 4 to 6 men. You already see them in the river, working their way across the Delaware. A cannon is being hauled down to the river's edge. And wouldn't you notice that even on the far right-hand side, the second face in, the darker one, is again Washington's enslaved valet, Billy Lee. he's in this image as well, at equal height of Washington. They have him on a horse at seemingly equal status, at least in terms of where he is in this painting. So that's happening beginning at 5:30 on the Christmas night, December 25th. The idea is to hit the Hessians by surprise. Contrary to old traditional belief, the Hessians are not drunk at Trenton at all. They had been inadvertently alerted and then discounted that, but they're not drunk at this stage. And Washington's conducting the crossing. Before he completes this crossing, he is going to learn that the plan's fallen apart. His personal crossing is above the Trenton Falls, where the water's running a little bit swifter, 11 to 14 miles an hour. The ice is already in the river, but at least it's not caking the river severely. Now, the most famous image of the crossing is this one, which almost makes it look like the Rhine River, but this is the Emmanuel Lightsey 1851 image. That's James Monroe again, the aide I talked about, carrying the flag right behind Washington. He's not Washington's aide, he's actually Lord Sterling's aide, but there's a lot of things in that boat that that are depicted as not real to life in cases, but a lot has been made of that image. I like it, it's included here, but I'm trying to show you that Washington is able to cross, but he's got to make 6 trips, all right? If he had the Durham boats that were called for were 16 and 4 flatboats, we don't know how many actually got there. Let's say it was that max. If you're going to cross your 3,000 men, that's probably 6 trips. 6 round trips across 900 feet of river. With water getting around that, it takes about 9 hours. So it's already running late. By the time they get to the other side, it's 3 a.m. the day after Christmas, December 26th. The idea was to attack at the break of dawn. They still have 9 miles to march. That's not going to happen. And what makes matters worse, as I already alluded to, Washington has learned, even before he reaches the far side, is that the crossings below the falls, where the water is more stagnant and it doesn't run as swiftly, the ice has caked the river so severely that none of those other forces, Ewing, Cadwalader, Putnam, can get across the river. Cadwalader gets close, but his artillery falls short at 150 feet from the river's edge, and you can't get artillery across that ice, and they had to abandon their mission for the 26th. So Washington has to improvise. Another mark of his generalship, he could call the whole thing off, but he decides, probably because he still technically outnumbers his opponent, and he could still inflict the element of surprise. So that 9-mile march is the only thing that's going to happen here. He's hoping against hope that Von Dunop doesn't support the Trenton force, and that he surprises it in time, and that his 2 prongs of attack not only can put the shock into the 3 Hessian regiments there under Rahl, but also work around to the southern end of it and prevent their escape. This map out of, I like these Mount Vernon maps, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can see from the movement of the American troops, they really do a fantastic job of conducting the operation. The late morning, the mid-morning assault at Trenton is going to be over fairly quickly. When all is said and done, Washington is going to lose less than 10 men. But how many casualties does he inflict? Over 900, all right? 800 captures, and probably just slightly over 100 killed and wounded, including the mortally wounded commander, Colonel Rahl himself. So, fortunately for Washington, this was all done swiftly by his own operation from McConkey's Ferry. He realizes he can't stay in Pennsylvania, especially if the other Hessian force just south of him reacts to this swiftly enough. And when Howe's redcoats closer to Princeton, less than 15 miles away, are alerted to this, Washington does not have the numbers to support this operation. He never intended to stay. That's why I think this is a separate campaign. It was only supposed to be one lightning strike, bring it back to the Pennsylvania side of the river. He'll try to do the same thing, not as successfully several months later at the Battle of Germantown, but this is kind of a prelude operation under that kind of a concept. So, the Battle of Trenton, huge success for Washington. But when he gets back to the Pennsylvania side, later on the 26th, with those 800 new soldiers from the enemy, the Hessians, Washington, as he's processing them, is going to call a council. And as he explains in a letter, he's trying to determine if he needs another operation. In other words, what they accomplished at Trenton good enough? What was the idea? To instill elan into his force, to prevent resignations within his regiments, to inspire the promoters of the cause, and to keep any Americans wavering from the cause. Give me this good news. Is that one simple attack at Trenton going to be good enough, or is it going to be considered a lucky shot? So when Washington meets with his officers at Newtown on December 27th, that's what they're discussing, and Washington's promoting the idea that they need to cross again. They need to carry on this operation against more Crown Force troops and to keep the winning going, so to speak. His hand is forcefully pushed in his favor when he learns that Cadwalader, thinking that Washington was in Trenton on the 26th, will get his men across. Remember, he was the force that was south of him at Bristol. He will cross 1,800 men on the 27th and notify Washington, essentially, we're on the New Jersey side, please come back and join us. Now on the 28th, a few inches of snow had fallen, and on the 29th, Washington will send his force across the river again. This time he's going to add more than what he had at Trenton. Now the flatboats were used, for example, to carry 18 cannons across for the 26th. That included the artillerists and at least 100 horses that joined them. So there were 18 artillery pieces at Trenton. For the next campaign, with the multiple crossings of the Delaware occurring here, Washington is going to have upwards of 40 cannons. A little presentation trick. If I don't know the exact number, I use the old upwards of and get away with it. So upwards of 40 cannons are going to be brought into this scene, and Washington will have somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 men for this next battle. And the next battle sometimes is called Second Trenton. We know it more as the Battle of Assunpink Creek, which is that coursing waterway that divides this map and flows into the Delaware River, hitting the south part of Trenton, and you see that lone bridge separating the Trenton side from the south and southeast side of Assunpink Creek. I will say a member of our audience, our good friend Glenn Williams, is writing the definitive account of this battle. It'll be published probably later this year, so look for that. It's one of those new theories of scholarship. I'm going to rely a little bit on what I was able to glean from Glenn and some traditional information, just to tell you that this is an interesting battle because it's quite the opposite of what you saw in the first Battle of Trenton. My claim is that this is the start of the next campaign, right? Because Washington's intent is, if he can, is to stay in New Jersey now with powers and numbers. So on that bank, that southern bank of Assunpink Creek, at least 6,000 men, maybe 7,000, and upwards of 40 guns up there. And Cornwallis, who was supposed to go back to England to visit his wife, is certainly in a surly mood, as he is recalled back to invest in that Mr. Washington, as Washington's always derided, and to counter his action that occurred at the First Battle of Trenton. So he comes through Brunswick and down through Princeton, and on that road, he will be slowed to a crawl by an effective advance post by Washington, which doesn't inflict a ton of casualties, but really frustrates Cornwallis's advance. It takes all morning and afternoon of January 2nd, so by the time Cornwallis reaches Trenton, it's getting dusk, getting very late in the afternoon, early evening, and rather than try to sniff out Washington's exposed flank and maybe prepare for a crossing the next morning, he figures he can just bull rush Washington's position over that lone crossing point, that bridge that you see near the junction of Assunpink Creek and the Delaware River. And after a few unsuccessful assaults, Cornwallis is left with probably somewhere close between 250 and 300 casualties, dead and wounded, mostly redcoats in this action. Washington's forces will lose somewhere close to 100 men in this action, but he is the victor again at the Second Battle of Trenton, the Battle of Assunpink Creek on January 2nd. So Washington's on great ground. He can hold that ground. He's going to be more vulnerable, though. You can see on the map why. If Cornwallis is able to turn Washington's right flank, You could push Washington against the Delaware River and then cancel Christmas for 77, right? That's it. So Washington can either think he's got enough power and numbers as the Heights being their own force multiplier, as they say, or else they can come to a different conclusion. He will hold a council, and they'll make that decision. The house where that council is held is still standing. It's not in the same spot that it used to be. It used to stand right near the bridge. It hasn't been moved very far. It's actually very close to the statue that I showed you in my title slide. All right? It's called the Douglas House, 2 S's at the end of the name. And Washington and his generals will meet there discussing their options. And the option that comes out of this is a heady one. They realize that the British rearguard now at Princeton, about 13 to 14 miles away, is vulnerable. And there's back roads to get there that have already been scouted out. There's been what we call a spy map produced to kind of give you the layout of the positions out there. And if you can capture Princeton, you got a shot at getting supply depots at Brunswick, for example, near the Raritan River as well. So Washington is truly for that idea. And he's convinced his men to stay in the ranks one more month longer, the ones that are currently with him. And with that remaining force, he will conduct that operation. So what you see on this next series map, while Cornwallis is thinking he's gonna trap the old fox Washington the next morning on January 3rd somewhere around Assunpink Creek, Washington has already started to vacate the position overnight. And on the early morning hours of January 3rd, Washington by the back roads, and it's well marked today with obelisks that you can follow all the way to Princeton. And now we're gonna have a different kind of a battle. I mean, we had a delaying action to start out in Assunpink Creek. We had a grand defensive battle. We had a surprise attack. Well, here comes a chance engagement. This will be the Battle of Princeton. And this one starts as you get close to the town of Princeton, and you see up at the top where the College of New Jersey stands, which later in the 1800s will be called Princeton University. You will see that there is 3 British regiments under Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mawhood or Mawhood. The 17th, the 40th, and the 55th Regiment of Foot, 12 to 1,400 officers and men. That's the vulnerable force. Mawhood is working his way to join up with Cornwallis, heading southward, and what does he see on the parallel road? That pinwheel. He's heading this way, and he sees Washington's troops heading toward Princeton, and he quickly will reverse his men, and then they will clash south of the college in Heights and open field near the Clark houses, William and Thomas Clark. And in that apple orchard, you will have those first engagements. That'll be led by Brigadier General Hugh Mercer, Scottish general, worked his way into Pennsylvania where he called home during the 7 Years' War and has since relocated to Fredericksburg, FOW, friend of Washington. So he's a good soldier. He's also a little hot-headed, and he's somewhat impetuously leading his Virginians and Pennsylvanians in this fight. And for those, I know this is a good Civil War audience out here as well. I should mention that Hugh Mercer is the great-grandfather of those 6 Patton brothers that fought in the Civil War. And he is the great-great-great-grandfather of the famous World War II General George S. Patton. So Hugh Mercer charges into that orchard, and there he will meet his fate. His horse will be shot out from under him, foreleg taken out by a cannonball, falls, Mercer falls on top of it, and he is bayoneted anywhere from 7 to 11 times, mortally wounded, and he won't die until, I believe, the end of the 3rd week of January. This is occurring on January 3rd. This is captured in images, but at this stage, that line begins to waver. Behind that line comes Cadwalader's associators, the 2 brigades of Philadelphia militia that Cadwalader has raised and trained, including that artist, Charles Wilson Peale. And Peale's brother, James Peale, is in a Continental Maryland regiment. He's not with them there, but he's with Cadwalader's troops. In confession time here, I have a direct ancestor that was an associator under Cadwalader as well, so I have a personal interest in this battle. But they are the ones that buckled in that first fire after Mercer goes down. We have this is in the early morning, this is in the first half hour of the battle between 7:30 and 8, and Washington is going to try to rally his troops. He will do the inspirational leadership, does it impetuously, does it recklessly, He will charge between the two lines, and one of his aides says, John Fitzgerald, as he enters into the smoky area, Fitzgerald has to pull his hat over his eyes because he doesn't want to see what he thinks is the ultimate fate of his dear General Washington, and he's relieved to see that Washington survives that assault and rallies his troops. Well captured. One of my favorite paintings of all time. This is John Trumbull painting basically what occurred in different stages. He amalgamates, just wanted to get that in a sense. He puts it all together as if it was occurring simultaneously. So you see the death of Mercer, really it's called The Death of Mercer is the title of the painting. It's the mortal wounding of Mercer, technically. Here's the interesting part. The model for this 1787 sketch that first started a painting that's going to be worked on for decades afterwards, for Mercer, is his spitting image son, Hugh Mercer Jr. I should mention this because that spitting image son has a son, Hugh Mercer III, who becomes a Civil War general in the Western Theater of the Civil War, commanding Georgia troops. So, and that's a great uncle of those 6 patents that I talked about as well. So there's Mercer with the model son serving as that kind of baby. You see Washington riding a brown horse in the background. Washington probably was on his white horse, Blueskin, in this, based on first-hand accounts. And there's a lot more to say about that image, but it's well captured by John Trumbull in this 1787 painting. Here's another image of Washington. This is William Rumney, 1848, showing Washington rallying his troops, I think appropriately on the white horse. And in the distance in the background, what do you see? The soldiers around the mortally wounded Mercer. So that's all, they have that again, all occurring simultaneously. And then here's the more modern image, a Troiani, Don Troiani. This is 2007, probably the most realistic of them, showing Washington on his white horse, leading the brown-coated associators. So in there is prize Charles Wilson Peale and my ancestor, George Painter. So hooray for George Painter. All right, so they're all moving forward across the Princeton battlefield. And what Washington has done is change the course of the battle by his personal leadership, by his inspiration, by refusing to give up the field. Over the next stages of the battle, that's going to be over in an hour, they will push back those retreating regiments of foot, primarily the 40th Regiment of Foot, which goes through Frog Hollow and will take cover around the town of Princeton and actually in Nassau Hall, which still stands today. And a lot of them will be forced to surrender, but a lot of them will make their escape as well. Of the 12 to 1,400 men in those 3 regiments of foot, Hood is going to lose over 400 in this battle. Washington loses a little less than 100. Put it all together, and now I'll combine the 2 campaigns. I'm still going to go with this idea that I'm separating them. But if you had the first Battle of Trenton, Assunpink Creek, and Princeton, Washington, at a cost of just barely 200 officers and men as casualties, has inflicted anywhere from 1,700 to 1,800 casualties upon the Crown forces. Add to that the 1,500 casualties that Howe has lost in his very successful New York campaign, and he's got to replace troops with 3,000 miles of ocean to transport them on. So it's not going to be a good winter for William Howe. Most importantly for Washington, he has restored New Jersey back into mostly American hands, at least everything west of the Raritan River from Brunswick or New Brunswick in toward the Delaware. Washington will take his troops on to the Watching Heights, the mountains that overlook Manhattan, and that's where he'll remain for the rest of the winter. That second campaign has kept him in New Jersey and has completely restored confidence and faith in Washington's leadership, has put new elan into the cause, has been the model for him to reconstitute his Continental Army as well. And this effect will be lasting. The first great painting in the United States of America is the image that you see on the right. It's the first painting of Washington that will be on public display. It is the Princeton image, and it depicts George Washington after the Battle of Princeton. That's why in the background you see Nassau Hall and British prisoners being escorted away. But in this image, Charles Wilson Peale, the veteran of the campaign who painted this, has relics of Trenton in there as well. The flags strewn around Washington's feet are the actual Hessian flags captured at Trenton that Peale has borrowed for that image. And that is probably the best image that we'll have of Washington. He posed for that image in 2 years after the contest in January of '79. The image on the right looks similar, but it means quite a bit different. Also created by Charles Willson Peale, it now shows Washington active with sword in hand. It is during the Battle of Princeton. The British in the background are not surrendered prisoners. They're being forced back to Nassau Hall. There's no Trenton images in this. And what do we see on at Washington's feet? We see that fallen commander. That is General Mercer. Guess who the model is for that General Mercer? Another son. He's a deaf mute, William Mercer, who is an apprentice artist for the Peale brothers, James and Charles Willson Peale. And he also supposedly looked a lot like his father. And he will be posing for that as well. And it's probably the physician above him is probably Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So you see those great Peale images there. James Peale, Charles Willson Peale's brother, who was in the Maryland Regiment, creates this 1782 image of the Battle of Princeton, showing Washington coming on the scene with his headquarters flag, blue background, 13 stars on it. And in the middle background, you see Mercer on his with his fallen white horse. And in the background, you do see Nassau Hall again. And then Washington will be completely reminded of the entire campaign years later. In 1789, he makes a special trip to go through Trenton, and they greet him with honors. At that same stone bridge over Assunpink Creek, we are now looking basically northwest from basically where the Delaware and the Assunpink Creek come together. You've got a side view of it. That's where Cornwallis's men met their fate at the foot of that bridge, and there's Washington on his white horse coming from south to north, going through the town, but he's on a special mission. And here's another image by Wyeth of it in 1830. He's on his way to his inauguration in New York City. And what a great reminder of what made Washington famous in the first place, the great contribution he made for the cause at the battles of Trenton and Princeton. And he goes to Princeton right after this as a constant reminder. And the final image I'll show to finish off our talk, another Trumbull image showing Washington in 1782, or excuse me, 1792, at the end of Washington's first term. Washington hasn't aged well. He's looking like Dollar Bill George now. He's only 60 years old, but he's only got one tooth in his head. All right, but Trumbull magically restores him to his Revolutionary War image, even though Washington posed for that. And what's in his right hand? The same dollared spyglass that Washington wept as he watched his men surrender at Fort Washington 7 weeks before this. Final image in the close. James Peale gets into this. He steals an image from his brother Charles and decides, I'm going to paint us both brothers as soldiers in this campaign behind Washington's white soldiers. A perfect meld between the artist and the person they most admired in the campaign that made him famous. Thank you very much. We have time for a few questions. Reverse Jeopardy. Put your questions in the form of answers, please. Oh, now the hands go down. All right, go ahead.
How did the U.S. troops rest, or did they rest, between January 2nd and January 13th?
No rest. The ones, the same, it's not all the same troops that fought at Assunpink Creek. They're on the defensive for that battle. They won't all be engaged at Princeton the next day, but it's the same troops that were at Assunpink Creek that will head up to Princeton.
That's right.
Adrenaline. It's a wonderful internal drug.
Yeah, hey Gary, since they were making a lot of impressive and tricky moves around there for several days, were there a lot of loyalists or Tories in that part of New Jersey to think them out, or was that pretty sparse?
The question is, were there a lot of loyalists that would have interfered with Washington's operations? There's going to be loyalists in New Jersey almost forced loyalists. There's even a signer of the Declaration of Independence who's forced to essentially rescind that and swear his loyalty to the crown after he's captured. But there are natural loyalists as well, but they seem not to have greatly interfered with Washington's operations like they will in Pennsylvania later.
Did I understand there were a lot of enlistments that were going to expire at the end of the year, and this was also driving Washington?
Right, the question is, to clarify what I was saying about enlistments about to expire. Washington if Washington didn't make a bid to get his men to stay on 1 month longer, the thing would have fallen apart before that second campaign that I brought in with Assunpink Creek and Princeton. So he would give a rousing speech in Trenton, along with a hard coin for $10 extra for the soldiers to stay longer, by the financier of the revolution, Robert Morris. He's preceded by that by Mifflin at Crosswicks, who uses essentially the same speech with Cadwallader's men to get them to stay on longer as well. By the time of March of '77, 2 months later, the first return that we see on March 15th shows 2,300 rank and file remaining, which adds up to about 3,000 officers and men. And Washington has a new iteration, a reiteration of his army, the Continental Army. So the Continental Army that fights later that year at the Philadelphia campaign is essentially a whole new army. 80% of it are brand new soldiers, with maybe just a 10% of it as a corps of 1776 veterans.
Did Mercer lead Pennsylvanians or Virginians?
He led Virginians and Pennsylvanians in this, but Cadwallader mostly has Pennsylvanians behind him. And Mercer himself was called Pennsylvania home in the 1750s, and then he moves to Fredericksburg, so he becomes a Virginian, but he's from Scotland.
You also mentioned in this first engagement that the Marines supporting Washington. John Barry and the sailors are supporting as well.
Yeah, the first engagement, now I'm not as versed on that, but yeah, there's like I said, I'm not really doing the whole story justice. In the time I came in here, I was mostly focused on Washington's role, but like I said, great scholarship, including a new book on the Marines as well that came out just a year and a half ago. Yes.
Could you tell everyone about your two books that are out there?
Well, my two books are after the campaign, so I didn't want to separate that. And we're actually almost out of those books. I think people heeded my recommendation, Christian, to buy more than one copy to keep the binding from falling apart. But my two books are carry the story from Washington from July 4, 1777 to July 4, 1778. And it's looking at the Philadelphia campaign, Valley Forge, and Monmouth, primarily through the perspective of headquarters. A unique way to look at it.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been a long, exciting day. A few things. I want to thank everyone in the audience who came today. Thank you on behalf of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation. I want to also thank the staff of the Shenandoah Foundation who worked a long time on this, everything from planning and social media posts to the room setup and all the book sales, everything, the presentations, so thanks to them as well. A couple announcements. Please take your name badges and drop them off outside in the foyer, outside of this room. Kirsten will show you where, if you can't, I don't know where the box is, so I'll figure it out too. But please give back your name tags. If anybody wants to talk with Gary more about his presentation, I know he covered a lot of ground. I'm sure he'll be out in the hallway here for a few minutes anyway. Houlihan's also opens at 4 o'clock. That's a great place for a Revolutionary War discussion. If you would also take your trash with you, well, not with you, put it in the trash can. And if you have glasses, put them on the side tables. There's an event coming in immediately at 4 o'clock. So we need to make sure that's good to go. And in the hallway, the gift shop, books and whatnot will be open for a little while as well. So once again, thank you to everybody to come. We enjoyed having this and putting it on, and I hope you did too. So safe travels to everybody.